What's up, shipbuilders? If you're looking for one of the cruelest, most barbaric ships, whose sole purpose is to deal destruction, look no further. This ship prioritizes damage, speed, mobility, cuts out all that other non-essential waste that just weighs everyone else down. What sets this ship apart is that it not only uses the White Dwarf 3015 engines for that highest possible top speed, but it only uses 2 of them instead of 4, while still having maximum mobility. In order to accomplish this, it has to cut out a lot of mass. Still, we're able to fit one of the top 3 best shields in the game, as well as one of, if not the best reactor, as well as some of the highest damage-dealing weapons. Altogether, they make this small ship one of the deadliest in the galaxy. If its aggressive looks don't prove it to you, let's take a look at how it handles the Crimson Fleet at Crix on very hard difficulty. One of the first things you'll notice is even though we only have 2 engines, we're still getting that maximum 280 top speed out of these engines. The other thing you'll notice is that we're getting that even with only allocating 6 points of reactor power to our engines, which means we can put more to our weapons and have those reload even faster. Next is just how fast those particle beams melt away the enemy shields, but the enemy's hull disintegrates even faster once all 6 Vanguard Hellfire autocannons get within range. We really don't even need to use the speed of the White Dwarf engines to distance ourselves from the enemy, because the weapons destroy them so quickly and our max mobility lets us move from one target to the next with ease. The Crimson Fleet didn't quite look to be at full strength there, but I like to think it's because the wiser pirates ran away once they knew we were jumping to their system. Alright, so let's take a look at how this ship is put together and how we managed to squeeze out this much power from such a small mass ship. The first thing I want to call out is the reactor. Now I went with a Pinch 8A reactor because it has that 1950 hull points, which is the highest in the game by far. Now that's at the cost of reactor power. This only produces 36. Compared to the maximum reactor power generated, which is 40. As you just saw, we didn't really need extra reactor power, but you might choose to have a different reactor, and given that the mass of this one is one of the highest in the game, this ship obviously will support whatever reactor you choose. Next, let's look at weapons. This has 6 of the Vanguard Obliterator auto projectors. These are some of the best particle beam weapons in the game. It has 4 of the PBO 175 auto helion beams, also one of the best in the game. And then it also has 6 Vanguard Hellfire auto cannons. Those auto cannons are actually ballistic weapons, but they fire so fast, one of the highest fire rates in the game, and you can have up to 6 of them on your ship. So in total, the damage that they actually do to shields is not bad, and their hull damage is just insane. Now, the other reason I went with those Hellfire autocannons is because each one only has a mass of 1, and I needed to keep the mass on this ship low in order to keep my maximum mobility, and so they helped with that. Now, these weapons are at the cost of range, so the particle beams typically have the longest range in the game. These ballistics have almost like a third of the range, and so you can't engage enemies from as far with these. So you typically use the particle beams to melt away the enemy's shields, and by then you're close enough to engage them with all of your weapons, particle beams, and the Hellfire autocannons, and their hull disappears almost immediately. Now it's time to talk engines. As I've already said, this has 2 of the White Dwarf 3015s. You're allowed to have up to 4 on your ship, but as I already said, just having 2 means you don't have to allocate as much reactor power to these engines, and you still get the max top speed of 180, which is way faster than any other engine in the game. Now, the problem with that is you don't get as much maneuvering thrust, which means your mobility might suffer. Now, especially because each of these engines, as you can see, takes up 95 mass by themselves, a total of 190 when looked at together for the two. Now, in total, we have about 510 mass units to play with until we start losing max mobility. So we really don't have much, just over 300 mass units to play with before we lose maximum mobility, which isn't much given the reactor we just looked at, and even some of the weapons you might be tempted to use, plus the shield. So as we go through this build, we'll talk through the considerations for each of those. Next is the shield. Now we went with the Vanguard Bulwark shield because this is one of the top 3 highest shield health shields in the game at 1450. But being a Class B shield, its mass is actually fairly low. So for this shield, its health points, its shield health to mass ratio is actually one of, if not maybe the best in the whole game, particularly for having such a high shield health. And so that's why we went with this shield. Lastly, the other ship system we need to talk about is the grav drive. Now, really the only thing I care about with the grav drive is getting the lowest mass grav drive that will give me at least 28 light years of jump range. And that's what this one does, because the maximum distance between the farthest star systems in the game is just under 28 light years. So as long as you can get that range, you can go anywhere in the game. And this grav drive accomplishes that for a ship with a low mass like ours. So now let's look at just how this ship is held together, which was actually one of the most difficult parts of building this, was how do I get these various pieces to come together in a way that is cohesive and somewhat symmetrical, and to keep the mass down. So you see I'm using that HopeTech landing bay, which you can get from HopeTech in the Valo system, and as you'll see, this just has a mass of 1, and so one of the lowest mass landing bays in the game. The slim docker and just one hab, one 1x1. Now that cockpit also, the Viking CP100 cockpit is the lowest mass cockpit in the game, which is also helpful. So everything on this ship, I'm trying to keep the mass as low as I can. Which brings me to one of the next challenges, which was actually fitting all of the weapons that I wanted to on this ship. So you'll see I've got 2 Horizon weapon mounts on there that hold the PBO 175s. Now each of those weapon mounts is a mass of 1, but I needed to get those weapons on there. Same with these Nova wings. These only have a mass of 1, but they also have 2 weapon slots. And they also have mounting sides on the side and on the back, which is helpful. The same is true for those landing gear, the AccuLanders. Those have connection points or mounting points on all sides, which was really helpful in bringing this build together, is just to have those to give this a kind of a cohesive look. Those landing gear also, their landing thrust to mass ratio is 1:1. Technically the HopeTech landing gear is a little bit better. It has landing thrust of 4 and a mass of 3. But I found that landing gear is really difficult aesthetically, and just because it's so bulky. So that's why I went with the AccuLander. And the last thing that we need to talk about is fuel. Now, the fuel container that I ended up going with, this 500T helium-3 tank, isn't the most efficient in the game. Nor is it even the second most efficient. But I found both of those to either be, asymmetrical on my ship more than I wanted it to be, such as the M50 Ulysses tank, which is only 25 mass with 250 fuel units, but it just fits on the left or the right side depending on which side you flip it, and so I wasn't a huge fan of that, and I thought that this tank actually gave me just enough fuel at 210 to get me anywhere I needed to go in the galaxy, and slotted under the one side nicely with the grav drive on the other, while keeping my mass down to a decent level. And so you'll see the mass is 509, and that's just under the 510 threshold. where my mobility would start to drop. Now, the way that you can calculate what that max mobility threshold is per mass is to basically take the maneuvering thrust of your engines and divide by roughly 12.4. Technically, I think it's maybe closer to like 12.355, but 12.4 is probably close enough. So maneuvering thrust divided by that factor of 12.4, and that will tell you the mass at which anything above that number, your mobility will start to go below 100. And so for this ship, it was at 510, but you can play around with it. And so I'm going to show you a few different options just on this ship for engines and show you what it might look like. You can play around with, again, power allocation to your engines doesn't have to be as high to get that maximum top speed, but you can still have max mobility. So just to give you an idea about what this would look like if instead of the White Dwarf 3015s, you use these SA 4330 engines, which are still a Class A engine, so you're getting that top speed of 150. But these only use 2 power points rather than the 3 that the White Dwarfs do. So you'd only have to allocate 4 power points, reactor points, to your engines to get max top speed with this configuration. And as you can see, you still have max mobility. Plus, you can also see our jump range actually went up when we did that to 29. That's because the mass of those engines is actually 10 points lower than the White Dwarfs. So you have a little bit more mass to play with those. Now, if you wanted to take it even further, we could get rid of these, go down to a Class B engine, which is going to decrease our top speed to 140. But again, these Slayton engines have some great maneuvering thrust. So if we go to these SAE 5660s, and I just have one of them, you'll see I almost have maximum mobility. It's just at 98. And I only have to have one of these engines, which means I only have to allocate 3 reactor power points to my engines to get that top speed. So an interesting setup there. And lastly, just to see what it might look like, the SAL 6830s with their 8,000 maneuvering thrust. Now the mass on these is quite a bit higher, and so it eats into its own maneuvering thrust a little bit more, but its maneuvering thrust is also quite a bit higher, and so you'll see the max mobility there. I've got a lot more mass to play with. Could probably put some cargo on this ship if I wanted to. But that's at a cost of top speed. My top speed goes down drastically to 130, which starting with at the White Dwarfs with 180 is quite a bit different. So I do hope you like just the overall build of this ship. I thought it was quite unique and surprised that I was able to get it to come together in a way that looked somewhat cohesive. But it's also something to play with. Just how few engines do you need to use for your build, which gives you more reactor points to allocate to weapons or other ship systems. So I hope you enjoy, and until next time, keep building.